Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing the album Beetle Giant Animals by the band Beetle Giant Animals.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So I really don't have a lot to say about this one, but for anyone here who watches this video and doesn't know this band quite yet, I'm sure that you will be surprised to learn of its origins, who these guys are and what type of music they're creating. This video was definitely a surprise for me, from the listening to the album itself to doing the research about it, and well, I'd like to share that with all of you, but for now here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So in the year of 1973 in Harrisburg, Virginia, a guitarist by the name of Stanley Whitaker would form a band with a bassist Rick Kennel, and the two actually met a year prior to that in Germany, but only then in the US would they actually form together this band. And the resulting band of the two would be named Happy the Man. Yes, you might know that band and you didn't know how what we're talking about is connected, so yeah, Happy the Man, formed by this duo, but of course a duo is not enough to create this band, so they tinkered around, they added players along until they finally settled on a 6-man lineup. And one of those men who joined Happy the Man in their what you might call MK1 incarnation was no other than vocalist, keyboardist, flautist, and saxophonist Frank Wyatt, which Stanley Whitaker actually took quite a liking to. Now, in a very blasphemous move, and I will fast forward time here a bit, so in the time frame between 1973 and 1979, a lot of things had happened to the band. Members kept coming and going and albums kept flowing, shows were being played and music was made, and until finally in 1979 the band was over and done with. Yeah, that doesn't really rhyme that well. And after several attempts to try and reform Happy the Man in the 1990s, the band finally did reform for the Nearfest Festival in the year of 2000. And in it we got to see 3 of the original members of Happy the Man, of course being Stanley Whitaker, Rick Kennel, and of course lastly Frank Wyatt. And the band itself actually persisted after it, despite forming in the 2000s yet again. They even persisted onwards up until 2004, when they released their newest album in 40 years called The Muse Awakens, which isn't supposed to be that good, but you know, it's something I guess. And since that point the band technically have never disbanded, but in a moment you'll realize that maybe their position in existence is a bit wavered. You see, as it so often happens, after releasing The Muse Awakens, most of the band members just found themselves too occupied with other musical projects. And well, that led to Happy the Man basically not doing a lot of things, not performing a lot of shows, and eventually not releasing any new material at that point. But as it also happened, Whitaker and Wyatt lived pretty close to one another, and seeing as they had a lot of compositions they were working for Happy the Man that were still unreleased, they decided to get together and create the music themselves as a duo, titled of course Beetle Giant Animals. Now, Beetle Giant Animals is maybe not your conventional sort of band. They've never really been a band, it's just a name given to them, but if you want to say who created this album, it would be generally considered as being created both by Wyatt and of course Stanley Whitaker. And lastly, I have to mention this out because I think it's a bit important. After creating this album in 2006, the two would go on to create a band called Oblivion Sun, and with that band they have released an album I believe in 2007 and then in 2013. So what we're basically seeing is this core of Happy the Man always going off in different projects and kind of putting Happy the Man aside, and for what it's worth I think it's a good decision because you don't really want to tarnish the legacy of such an amazing band. Now, Beetle Giant Animals have only released one official album to that sort of duo of theirs, and of course it's the self-titled one called Beetle Giant Animals. And let me get this right out of the way right from the get-go, the first 5 tracks on this album are absolute rubbish, and that's of course just me sweet talking things over. The first side, if you might call it, of this album is just suffer, pure suffer to my ears, and it's not objectively bad, but the fact of the matter is it's the most cliche, non-progressive, soft rock music that you can ever get, and it's really hurting my ears to even fathom the fact that it's included in this series. But the thing is, on a different level, this also struck me on this like personal anecdote, because thinking of Happy the Man, thinking of their self-titled debut and Crafty Hands, such stellar albums, well performed, well made, well compositioned, and then suddenly you get an album like this, made by basically the same people who wrote the said 2 albums that I just mentioned, and I know it just kind of hurts seeing that they create something so bad when they're capable of creating something so good. But then after the first 5 tracks, something that seems to never really happen anywhere in music just suddenly happens, and that's that this album just kind of regains consciousness from its blackout and just casually strolls it back into Happy the Man territory, basically turning this entire album upside down into a very fine, if not even good, Happy the Man sounding like album. Now admittedly, right before the end they decide to just remind everyone, hey, remember that this album started off sounding like shit? Well, we still know how to create said shit, so we have a track called Everywhere, which is the second to last one, and it sounds like absolute garbage, and it's also followed up by the title track, which to me is not really that bad in being like this very cliche rock ballad, but in another sense it's just really low standard quality prog that I don't enjoy that much. But I think that in order to fully comprehend this album, I'll just have to give you some examples, so I'll go with the good, the bad, and the ugly method and give an example for each and every one of them. So firstly, the good, and my personal pick from this album as a good track has to be the track called The Lift Clings Quivers. This one is the 6th track on the album. This is where basically the album goes from being absolute shit to being actually really good. And the fact of the matter is, this one is a soft, sort of jazzy tune, maybe even lo-fi to some extent, and it really caught me off guard. And I don't know if I think that it's the best from the album just because it's really that good or because I was so surprised to hear it then. Moving on, secondly, of course, we have the bad, and my pick for the bad has to be the track called Whole. This one is a whole bunch of bullcrap, okay? This is, as I said, the most cliche, you know, uninspired rock ballad. It's just, it's not good. I hate to think of the fact that it made it on the list in any way possible. And you know, when I rank all the songs thinking about like what I listened to this year, this is definitely one of the worst ones. And thirdly, of course, and lastly, we have the ugly. Now my pick for the ugly has to be the title track. Now the fact of the matter is, this one is just overstaying its welcome. It is decently progressive, and I guess that it's fine, and it's nowhere comparable to the shit that this album starts off with, but the fact of the matter is, it is too long and it gets redundant. But the reason I think that it is an ugly track, it's because it's the final one on the album, and that's the impression you're being left with. And overall, unfortunately, when I came out of this album, my personal impression of it was at least a bit sour in the mouth, and that's not a good thing. So all in all, I am very conflicted about this album. I don't know what to think about it. There's so many edges to the music on here, in a good way and in a bad way, but I think that for what it's worth, I would try maybe to consider coming back to some sections from this album. So personally, I dislike this album's cover, but in order to be the sweet ass that I am, I'm gonna give it a compliment first, so I like the colors being used on here. But the painting itself, it's so childish, it's so amateurish, and it's not in order, I think, to achieve a certain effect. I just think that it's the best that they had. Honestly, if you ask me, any picture of the two men just standing together in like a field would have done it for me. I think it would have been way better than this one. I don't like this cover, and of course, to cap it all off, we have the text. It's such a cringy font, I hate it. I would have told you what it's called, but I simply don't remember it because I try and avoid this font like the plague. I know about the existence of it, but I would never use it myself. And to finish this off, as I said, good colors, so yeah. So if I do ever come back to this album, which I don't see myself doing anytime soon, I'll be coming specifically back to track 6 up until 9 and nowhere more than that. But for what it's worth, this album got me into a huge conundrum, and I think that I'll give it a very mediocre average of 5 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Fandangos in Space by Carmen. It sounds like it actually sounds, okay? And yeah, I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay, Juan, Arist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.